Hello and welcome to Read the Bull, the only podcast dedicated to finance and investing books. I'm your host, Stefan Prelog, and today I'm thrilled to welcome my guest, Greg Zuckerman. Greg is an award-winning special writer at the Wall Street Journal, and I just learned he's been there now 27 years. Welcome, Greg.
It's crazy. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks for joining me. So we've known each other a long time. Greg's the author of 4 books, well, actually 6. We'll get to that in a moment, but he's the co-author with 2 special other authors, co-writers. But we're going to talk about mostly the 4 books that you've written. I'll just read the titles really quickly, and then we'll get into it. But your first book published was The Greatest Trade Ever, Behind the Scenes of How John Paulson Defied Wall Street and Made Financial History. That was in 2010. That was by Crown Business. And then we had The Frackers, 2014, the new Billionaire Wildcatters. And then in 2019, The Man Who Solved the Market, How Jim Simons Launched the Quant Revolution. And then most recently, Shot to Save the World, the inside story of the life or death race for a COVID-19 vaccine. We have 2 of them featured here. So you keep pretty busy. You have a busy day job at the Journal, and you've written 4 books. And a very, I'll say, pretty varied subjects that you've tackled. So let's start with 2010, about John Paulson, and that's where you and I got introduced. It's now been almost 14 years. But how did you get interested in John Paulson, and why did you decide to write that book?
Sure. So in late 2008, maybe, I wrote a front-page story about Paulson and his trade, and I sort of identified it as the greatest in financial history.
Yeah.
It was a difficult, frankly, pitch internally. There's a lot of drama there. A lot of people at the Journal were like, well, we want to write about the losers, not the winners, because everyone was suffering. This was late 2008, and I was like, yeah, guys, but this is literally the greatest financial trade in history, and I convinced them it was a front-page story. So I wrote this front-page story. An agent reached out to me, suggested I write the book, and I threw myself into it. And it was a lot of fun. It was educational. It was difficult. It was my first, so it'll always be near and dear to me.
You have some great subjects, but this was so you started writing in what year? Do you remember?
So that I started in 2008, and I think it came out 2009, maybe the paperback in 2010. I don't even remember at this point. Sounds like you can look it up.
So tell me about that process, and I want to talk to you later about how long did it take you, because you're reporter by trade. So did you approach it kind of as a story, just a much longer story? I know you got into John's personal life. Obviously, he wasn't participating in the book. So how was that as a challenge?
So it was challenging that it was my first book. It was a challenge in that this is CDS contracts, CDOs, derivatives, kind of complicated stuff, and I wanted it to be read by the masses as well as those on Wall Street. So that was the challenge. What I write about, and this is one example, is I write about people. Yeah. And my approach, and it's in all my books, is sort of a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, meaning that I'm going to get into some really complex, difficult topics, and I do CDS contracts, fracking, hydraulic drilling, horizontal drilling, quant stuff, math, and then most recently the most science one. But I'm going to do it through the people, through the characters, and I'm going to make them relatable, or at least that's my goal. Yeah. And that's my approach, and that's my hope. So I threw myself in that regard. I wanted to explore who John was, and it's not just about John. It's about those characters who anticipated the financial meltdown, and what can we learn about it? Behind all of my books is a contradiction. Mm-hmm. It's a surprise, and the element is it should not have been these people who did this revolution, whatever it is, a discovery, a big trade, changing the country, changing the world. It should not have been these people. So that's a commonality with all my work.
Yeah. So, and a little bit more detail, but John Paulson before this trade was known as a merger arb guy, where basically he was identifying companies that might get acquired and would bet one way or would bet on them before they got acquired, trying to anticipate some moves in the market. And he was successful, but wasn't the huge star that this made him. And this trade netted him personally, but netted his investors, I think, about what, 12 or 13?
20 billion over 2 years. 15 billion in 1 year, 2007, and then 2008, another 5 billion only.
Yeah.
Slowed down a little bit.
Some good money there.
Yeah.
So how, and you also get into the guy who really kind of was the architect of the trade, who's interesting as well. You're talking about people behind the scenes and the characters, Paolo Pellegrini.
Yeah.
Just give us a little sample of who he was.
Sure. In a lot of my work, I try to obviously write and focus on key main characters, but there are always going to be people that are overlooked who played important roles, and they just don't get recognized by history. And that's kind of my job, I feel, because there always is somebody. And Pellegrini is the one who brought the idea to his boss, John Paulson, who, as you suggest, was just a merger arb. I don't mean just to me. I don't mean to demean him and minimize him, but and I call him a singles hitter. And he was really upset about that.
He didn't like that.
He was not happy about that, but he was a singles hitter. It's not to say that he was a strikeout hitter, meaning he was successful, profitable guy, but he was not a well-known guy on Wall Street. And Pellegrini's the one who said, hey, boss, I know you're a little concerned about this housing market. Maybe you should use these CDS contracts. And Paulson had never heard of them. Pellegrini wasn't any expert in CDS contracts either. And that, to me, is the surprise. And people say, well, some people give Paulson a lot of credit for anticipating the financial meltdown, the housing collapse. Other people say, oh, he was a merger arb and he got lucky. To me, coming up with a thesis is just the first step. And it's not even the most impressive act on his part or others too. It's how to express the thesis, and that's what he did better than everybody else. He figured out the perfect trade. That's why I call it the greatest trade. Had limited downside and tremendous upside. So Pellegrini is just a character. He kicked around Wall Street for years. He was a failed investment banker. He was approaching his 50s, maybe even older than 50. He was so worried about his job that he was parking like blocks and blocks from the office because he thought this was his last job. And then lo and behold, it got to the point where after they started making their big money, he's a superstitious guy, so he didn't tell his wife how well it was going. And then, if I recall from my own book, it's been a few years, he went on vacation with his wife.
I remember the scene. This is great.
Right? And then the wife goes to the ATM to get some cash out, and she goes, Paulo, there's $120 million in our account. And he's like, oh yeah, honey, I forgot to tell you. We did pretty well. I got a nice bonus this year.
Yeah, that's a nice. It wasn't a mistake that you go to the ATM and there was 120 million. Okay, that's great. That was a great scene in the book, and there was so much happening there. And again, these were insurance contracts basically. Because I remember after the book, because full disclosure, I worked at a firm that represented Paulson at the time, and he got a lot of flack because he profited basically from subprime. That doesn't mean people lost houses because of him, but he bet against the other people who were betting on the continued rise in the market. Is that a fair assessment? Of the criticism?
Yeah, there was a lot of criticism, different kind of criticism. I mean, I was criticized as well. The funny thing is Paulson came out and condemned the book, and then the New York Times came out and gave me a poor review because they say I didn't focus enough on, and I broke this news in my book, on the fact that Paulson worked with various investment banks to create toxic mortgage products. And then people suffered as a result. So some people say, aha, how dare John Paulson? And the way I looked at it is, if you have any kind of sense of what things were like back in the day, back in 2007, 2008, again, John Paulson was a guy people mocked. They didn't think he was any kind of success story or prescient investor. So he did go with investment banks, and he said, hey, or it was Pellegrini and others, you should put XYZ mortgage in these pools, and they did blow up. But the people on the other side of the trades, the people that bought these pools, they weren't mom and pop investors. They were really sophisticated, more sophisticated than John was about housing, and they knew what was in there. They could have studied the mortgages. No one was stopping them. So I don't think he did anything wrong. He worked with the banks. They put together this pool. Other people went long on the pool. Paulson went short on the pool, and it ended up blowing up. But yeah, in hindsight, he's this genius, and how dare he work with the banks, and he knew this was coming. But at the time, people sort of mocked him, and I write about it in the book.
Yeah, and so he did come out and condemn it, but it kind of aged with him, right? Later, he came around and What,
I mean, who doesn't want to have a book written about them called The Greatest Trade Ever? My gosh. So later he kind of said, well, my friends told me to reread the book and I kind of liked it more than I did at first, kind of thing. He also didn't like how I got into his personal life and who he is, and I get that. He wanted a really boring, I mean, you know better than that. He wanted a really boring book about, I took this stuff, but then I took that stuff, and who wants to read that?
Right. So, yeah, a little side note, and Greg and I were talking about this before we started, but a few years into my career, I was a book publicist and was thrown into it, and here I am with a top Wall Street Journal writer and John Paulson in a room, and yeah, you got into his personal life, and I remember just witnessing, because I had experience with book publishing, that I was in that room to kind of I don't know, oversee the conversation, but it was very interesting. He did push back on some personal things, but I want to leap forward because we'll get to your other books, but in 2019 you wrote about Jim Simons. And another, again, John Paulson was famous because he famously secretive. Jim Simons would probably put that to shame in terms of being secretive. So again, you're writing about someone interesting. How did Jim Simons get on your radar? And tell me about, kind of compare and contrast Paulson and Simons in terms of subjects.
Sure. So as a financial reporter for the Wall Street Journal, it was always sort of the mystery out there. How does Jim Simons do it? Yeah. And I always knew if I could figure that out, people would be interested. I approached Jim years ago and asked him through his representative if he would cooperate on a book, and they said no. And I kept coming back to it. And then I read the Ashley Vance book on Elon Musk. And early on, he kind of says that Musk said no, but he eventually came around. So I thought, I don't know, maybe I'll do the same. Maybe I'll start writing this book, and Jim Simons will come around. And, you had asked earlier about these books. I've always taken on really difficult topics, and they're, at least for me, and I do them in a short amount of time, and I kill myself, like physically. I literally do. My last book, Shot Saved the World, I did 3 all-nighters, and I had 3 close to nervous breakdowns. So when you ask, the Simons book, the crazy thing about the Simons book is I throw myself into it, I start writing it, and even halfway through, I'm getting really good stuff about his early days, the middle period of Renaissance, this mysterious, secretive hedge funds, and yet I'm up nights worrying that why would anyone buy this book if I can't tell them what's going on right now? And why would somebody at Renaissance who's there right now talk to me? Because they get paid so much, they get fired for sharing anything, they're really secretive. And thank the Lord, I found people who work there to this day willing to talk to me, but that kept me up nights.
Yeah. You say in the book you did 400 interviews with 30 current and former employees there. I mean, over what time frame?
Overkill, Stefan? What do you think?
Yeah, a little bit. But I mean, what was the time frame? Because again, you have a deadline. The publisher says we need this book done by X date. Yeah. You're an intrepid reporter. You're thorough. So I mean, how much? What was the time frame like? And how you said you have almost three nervous breakdowns.
That was the more previous book. I didn't have nervous breakdown on this one, but I lost a lot of sleep.
Okay.
You're bringing back some nightmares. I remember when I passed it in, I pressed the button and I came upstairs from my basement. I said to my wife, I'm done. I am done. That's my last book.
Yeah.
I can't do it anymore. I can't. Ended up doing another one after that.
Right.
But yeah, it was difficult. It was hard to get people to talk. People would schedule meetings with me, competitors of Simons, and then cancel like the night before. And then I'd be like, well, why are you canceling? And they'd say, oh, Jim asked us not to talk to you, Greg. And I was like, you compete with Jim. He's a rival. Why do you care? No, he's Jim Simons. It was like a mafia don kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was hard. Thanks for bringing back those nightmares.
No, I mean it's a fascinating book. Before you wrote the book, did people know about his? I mean, people knew obviously he started this math program at Stony Brook, which became like a renowned. People don't think Stony Brook's like a world-class institution, but he helped build a world-class math program. People knew about that, but about his background I didn't know he was a code breaker during the Cold War.
Yeah.
How much did people know before you published this book?
There've been some articles I'd written over the years, Bloomberg, some other places, II, but not in depth like the book. And there was a lot that no one really knew about. And just sort of the approach and behind the scenes, there was so much drama.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to this paradox. Why was it Jim Simons and his people? They're mathematicians and they're scientists. They don't care about companies. No. I grew up trading stocks like as a little kid, reading books about investing, learning about it. The guys at Renaissance couldn't care less about companies. At one point they say we should eliminate the names of these companies, just put numbers in there. They're not even capitalists, some of them are. It's such a paradox that it should have been these mathematicians and scientists to solve the market. So that drove me, that paradox.
It was a collection of characters, but some interesting parts that came out. You realize how competitive people in mathematics are. And that's kind of interesting because they're academics, yes, but you don't think of them as competitors or people but these were very competitive people.
Yeah, that's why they're so good. The really competitive people are the scientists that I met on my last book, A Shot to Save the World. These are the people that developed mRNA and the techniques that saved us all. And I had no idea. I thought, these biotech companies or in the academic labs, they're just in there and they're trying to make improvements and stuff. But they're really competitive. They're scared about the competition. There are people out there working on similar things that some other lab, and they're worried about that. So yeah, I'm drawn to, I guess, maybe these competitive kind of people.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I just want to stay on Jim Simons for a couple of minutes, because what's interesting to me too is, by the time he started Renaissance and had a couple of iterations beforehand, but he was in his 40s. He had, you said, I think
even later, right? 50s maybe? He had the breakthrough in his 50s. Yeah.
But you started to get, and people even in mathematics and in academia thought it was kind of beneath him to do this, right? It wasn't revered, to go after. But he always kind of had, you highlight it early in the book, he always kind of had not one foot in, one foot out, but he had this interest, and he liked the rush that investing brought. But I want to ask, because it was very interesting to kind of see that he had really 3 careers before he started this. And even when he started Renaissance, he didn't have success until really he met, Robert Mercer came along. Tell me how things turn around for Renaissance. What was kind of that moment?
Yeah, and to your point, that's one of the surprises from the book. I was worried when I started the book. Well, they're the greatest investment firm in history, 66% a year since inception for decades and decades. So I was hoping there'd be some drama there and obstacles to overcome, but I was concerned there wouldn't be. They've had these crazy records. And then when I dove into it, I realized, he started the firm in 1978. Yep. And they didn't really figure it out till the early 90s. Yeah. And they almost gave up a bunch of times. And it took, as you suggest, these 2 programmers from IBM, Bob Mercer and Peter Brown, to come over and figure out. Jim and his colleagues had already figured out futures and bonds, but you can't make a lot of money in currencies, commodities. You can't make a ton there. You need to do it in equities. And that's what Mercer and Brown are responsible for. And frankly, even they almost didn't figure it out. There was a guy named David Magerman who realized that they had a number in their system that wasn't updating. Yeah. It was a fluke. It was the weirdest thing. And he's like, and he was about to get fired, that guy Magerman. And he went to Bob Mercer and he's like, boss, I think this number is off. It's not updating. And Mercer's like, you're right. And the rest is history. So it was kind of fascinating. It's
really interesting, and I recommend all these books, but this one particularly because it's particularly now as AI is becoming such a story. These guys were really on the forefront of machine learning.
Yes,
they were doing things, and I love I get geeked out because you're talking about how they were amassing all this data. They were getting records from the World Bank and stuff, historical price data going back to the 1800s. Yeah, and at the time they didn't know that it was going to be useful. But they were inputting all this, they were cleaning data and importing it, and later it would be useful. But it's really kind of the roots of machine learning. And you also didn't realize how impactful it was for other industries, what they were doing.
It's such a great point. They are the pioneers when it comes to predictive algorithms, machine learning, AI. They were doing this stuff in the 80s. You're right. Yeah. Collecting data when it wasn't even clear what it was going to be used for. It wasn't even Jim necessarily. There was a guy, Sanford Strauss, who... he's the earliest I can identify data analyst kind of thing. And he was collecting this stuff and cleaning it, like you said. And people weren't doing that at the time. And later it became really crucial for them.
Yeah, it was really interesting. So I want to jump around because we don't have time to talk about all the books, but I do want to talk because the Frackers was a little bit of at least at the time, it seemed to me when I saw you were writing this, heard you were writing this, a little bit of a departure for you. How did the Frackers kind of come on your radar, and how did you end up writing the book, and what was the pitch to the publisher?
So the pitch to the publisher was that, well, the pitch was to my agent. This is the biggest business revolution out there. I just written about Paulson and the characters that anticipated the financial meltdown. This was the most important thing going.
Yeah.
And my agent was sort of lukewarm about it.
Yeah.
And I was excited about it.
Yeah.
And so I got rid of my agent, and I've only represented myself ever since.
Yeah.
My publisher was very excited about it, and it was a departure, but in some ways it's the story I look for, which is unlikely characters. So if you think about it, who should have led this revolution where all of a sudden we're exporting oil? We are exporting oil to the Saudis. It's crazy, the concept.
Yeah.
Because I remember just times when it was obvious we were running out of oil and gas in this country,
Sure.
and now we've got this abundance of it. It doesn't make sense. And again, it's unlikely characters. Who should have led the way? Should have been Exxon,
Sure.
Mobil, and BP. It wasn't. It was Aubrey McClendon, Harold Hamm, these smaller guys in North Dakota and Oklahoma. And it's my favorite book, frankly, because, just because the process was just so eye-opening. I got to travel to little towns in Louisiana, North Dakota, slept at a man camp, Pennsylvania, Texas, and it was fascinating. Oklahoma, it was great. So,
how did they receive you? When you were going out there meeting these guys, like, you're a Wall Street Journal reporter from New York, going out to these towns. What was the reception for you?
I'm wary because there's a sense that the media is very hard on the oil and gas industry, and I guess we are. And I also think that the heartland of this country never gets a really chance to interact with those on the coasts.
Yeah.
That was one of the reasons why I loved it. And we have so much more in common than you would think. So they were a little wary of me, but I guess I was wary of them as well. But when you get to know each other, you realize they don't hate the environment. They're not polluting. They make mistakes for sure, but they're outdoors more than I am. I'm sitting at my desk at the Wall Street Journal most of the day. These guys have ranches and they're outside and running around, whatever. So I loved the experience, and they're entrepreneurs. We talk about technology and the revolution, technology and innovation. Everyone thinks right away of Silicon Valley. In the heartland of this country, where they're drilling down a mile and they're going horizontally for more than a mile, and they can pinpoint the spot, that's innovation right there, and it's American innovation. So it's important that we all be appreciative. I think would be appreciative, and it bought us time so we could transition to this greener world and transition to natural gas. It's not to say that fracking is the perfect thing whatsoever. There are mistakes that are made, and in some ways maybe we're getting more addicted to fossil fuels, but I like to think we also bought some time so that we could innovate towards a greener future.
So how many interviews did you do for that one?
Countless, endless. I like these topics, so I like talking to people, and I like throwing myself into it. Once I'm into a topic, I just sort of throw myself into it. Yeah.
So just touch on that. What's the difference when you're writing? Obviously it's a shorter medium when you're writing an article, but what's your approach in terms of versus writing one of these books and your reporting? Do you have a different approach for your writing?
Well, I travel more for my books, and I love that. Getting out there, meeting people, it's still really important. Yeah. I see colleagues, especially younger people, they don't even speak on the phone sometimes.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
They're not as comfortable speaking on the phone. And I will still meet people for lunch and dinner and drinks and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's important. But getting on a plane and going out there and meeting people is just a pleasure. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So, and you get to kind of use different muscles, roll up your sleeves on a topic, and have a little bit of a longer lead time and longer deadline than on a day-to-day story at the Wall Street Journal, which is great. Yeah.
So you said after you wrote The Man Who Solved the Market, you weren't going to write another book, but in 2021, you wrote The Shot to Save the World. So why'd you decide to write another book?
Well, believe it or not, there were some similar themes.
Okay.
So again, I'm just drawn to that paradox. So who should have saved us from this coronavirus? It should have been Merck. Merck is the vaccine company. When you think of the MMR vaccine, all measles, mumps, rubella, it's Merck. You think of GSK, vaccine company. I can go on and on. These are vaccine companies. Instead, it was Moderna beyond tech.
Right.
So when I started hearing about these companies, this company in Boston, and frankly, Moderna, until COVID, people were really skeptical of Moderna.
Sure.
People thought the guy who runs Moderna, Stefan Bancel, was like an Elizabeth Holmes kind of character. And that's like catnip for a guy like me. I love that. Interesting character doing something unlikely, achieving something unlikely. Well, I was hoping he would achieve it or they would achieve it when I started writing it. I made a little bit of a bet that they'd be successful. But that's kind of why I threw myself into writing. And also I get a chance to learn. I do all this to learn. And I was awful in math and science. So late in life, I've been forced to learn it.
So you've written 4 books over the course of now a dozen years.
Yeah.
Has your process gotten better? Are you going to write another book? How has your process changed, I guess? Let's start there.
It's more or less the same. I identify some big revolution, some change, and then I figure out who are the important characters responsible for that revolution. That's historically what I've done with all 4 of those. I am about to start a new book. Can't really talk about right now.
Okay.
And it's a little different. It's a little similar to my first book, frankly. It's an echo of the first book. But the process is not so dissimilar. You find out who the important people are. You beg them to talk. You don't beg them. You ask them to talk. And if they don't talk, you figure out a way to get them to talk. There always is a way.
Yeah.
I kind of lecture young reporters at the Journal. I do a class about that, how to get people to talk.
Yeah.
But I always show that it is, I believe it's in people's interest to talk to me. I'm talking my book, as it were. But literally, yeah. But identify a topic that excites me and that one that I can be in my study downstairs, 2 a.m. It's cold, everyone's sleeping upstairs, and I'm still into it. It's not easy to find those topics.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, how the length of time, has that changed? Is it, these are all fairly extensively reported books. How long does it usually take you to write a book?
Takes me a year and a half, and those are obscenely difficult deadlines, and I can't do that anymore. So on this new one, I'm going to take a couple years. I decided. So and I think the Shot Save the World was like a year because I wanted it to come out kind of during the pandemic, but as we were kind of rolling out the vaccines, and that was absurd. So that was a hard. Thank you for bringing that memory up again. A very tight deadline.
Tight deadlines.
But it focuses my mind. A tight deadline. So I would procrastinate if I didn't have a tight deadline. So part of the reason I embrace these topics is because I know that if I throw myself into it and I focus on mine and have a tight deadline, I can get it done. Whereas if I had, some women take 3-4 years, I would sort of go play basketball for one evening and go do something else with my kids, and I would never get it done.
Well, you broke a story I remember about Bill Gross and PIMCO. Were you ever thinking about doing a book? Because we know Mary Childs did a great book on Bill Gross and PIMCO. Or are there any topics you're like, I wish I would have written that? Is that one of them, or any others?
I thought about it. I kind of like to, this is like opening up the kimono a little bit.
That's good.
I need to like my characters.
Okay.
It's not to say that I put them on a pedestal. They're all flawed. They're all great characters. I love great characters. I love great characters. I don't believe, and there are authors, I won't leave them nameless. There are other authors that make everything heroes and villains. Not in my books. I really believe, I love when people say, Greg, I like the book, but that Aubrey McClendon, I don't know if I like him or not. I love that. But there's got to be something I find attractive and interesting about them. And it's not to say that Bill Gross is not a good person, but I didn't really want to spend 2 years, given all the stuff, how he tortured people at his firm. I didn't want to go through that. Meanwhile, Mary wrote a great book, so good for her.
Yeah, okay, we'll leave it there. Any other topics or things that have gone, you've seen books written about, or maybe haven't been written about that you're like,
that I wish I did?
Yeah.
Probably, but I always have something I'm working on, so that keeps me occupied and focused. And I try to pick topics that excite me, that are interesting intellectually, and that they're interesting characters, and then I can share something with the world maybe they didn't know about. And again, get that theme of spoonful of sugar helps the minute. Some important topic that I think I can maybe shed some light on. So, no, I don't have any deep. I have regrets other things in life, but not in the book. All
right, that's another discussion, another podcast entirely.
Yeah.
There's a new book coming out. A fellow or former colleague of yours, Rob Copeland, is writing a book about Ray Dalio. So I just want to ask, because there was a New York Post story that talked about Dalio and Bridgewater getting all these lawyers and PR firms to combat the book. I think Rob's probably happy that's going to bring more attention. But, you know, Simons, you said you got to at least sit down with you for 10 hours, really, before the book.
More than that, 10 sessions, 10 2 hours on average. So about 20 hours or so,
You sat down with John. Before publication, was there any ever issues, and this is something publishers sometimes have to deal with, any ever a threat of litigation or any threats in terms of, you know, hey, you better get this right or we're going to sue?
No, Jim asked me not to write the book in our last session together. And
he did?
I was like,
Jim,
it's at the publishers. It's a little too late. No, I had one guy sort of dangle like some payoff kind of thing if he or she wasn't going to be in the book, but I don't think he or she was serious about that.
Yeah.
No, thankfully, knock on wood, knock on everything else here, I haven't been sued. I've been threatened just a little bit, but nothing substantial.
Yeah.
Brought in some lawyers once,
Yeah.
but it didn't end up materializing into too much of a problem.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about bias. You said, you know, you're attracted to these characters. You like them in some way. That's not to say that, you know, you think they're heroes or maybe villains. How do you guard against bias in your reporting and in these books?
I think I'm inherently, my wife will concur, kind of cynical slash skeptical. So I'm always looking for the flaw. And frankly, I'm attracted to the flaw. And I think it makes for better reading. And it's more believable. We're all flawed. We're all gray to some extent. I mean, most of us, great characters. So I kind of look for that. And it keeps me honest. And that's a good question. So I don't, frankly, I don't find anyone really admirable out there that I write about.
Okay.
So I may find them interesting characters, but you know, in their personal lives, are they good fathers? Are they good mothers? Are they good parents? Are they good brothers and sisters? I have no idea. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't.
Yeah.
So that to me is it's how I judge a person. Are they a good friend? Are they a good parent? And you can't tell with these people. It's for show most of the time anyway. So I never really get too enamored with them.
Yeah. But you do get personal. I mean, Simons, you got into his personal life quite a bit, and the people who worked for him, John Paulson and the Wildcatters. I mean, you got some personal elements here. So along the way, I mean, were there things that you know, that did turn you off or that you really admired in a way? And I guess how does that impact, you know, as you're writing it, when you find out some information that you didn't know before? Yeah,
so Jim in particular, he's a really good guy. He is an objectively really good guy. He's funny, he's relatable, he's a quant, so he knows the math side, but he also was a great manager. He creates incentives for people, for his employees. He knows how to hire really well, and he's very charitable, and he's trying to do things like find autism treatments right now, which I'm rooting for him and hoping it works out. So it's okay to say these are impressive people.
Sure.
I just don't put them on a pedestal because they've done bad things as well, all of them.
Yeah. So after you wrote the book, there was an article you wrote about some back taxes that the employees.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So you had to write that story. I mean, did you hear from Jim, or like what was it like reporting? So this was, I think in 21, it was reported that they had to pay. There was ongoing battle between the IRS and employees at Renaissance, and they were ordered to pay ultimately $7 billion in back taxes.
Okay, so the bigger issue, frankly, that was after the book came out.
Yes.
So at that point, if Jim Simon doesn't like me, I don't care. But the bigger issue was while I was writing the book, I broke the story about how the firm was fighting with this guy, David Magerman. I don't know if you recall that.
Sure.
It was about politics.
Yes.
Bob Mercer was a big Republican. Well, I would say Republican, a big Trump guy. And Magerman was really upset about Trump. And they were battling. Yes. And that was the time when I was trying to get people at Renaissance to talk, get the firm to talk. And I do remember thinking, geez, am I killing my chances to write this book by writing the story for the Journal? But frankly, they employ me. They're my employer. My first allegiance is to the Wall Street Journal. I love the Wall Street Journal. I love what we do there. We play it down the middle. We're unbiased, or we try to be unbiased journalists. So I love the Wall Street Journal, and you know, at the end of the day, I had to roll the dice and say if if they won't talk to me because of this article, what can I do? But I do think in general that if you are very transparent in your journalism, and you would respect, I think you appreciate that. If you're very transparent, I think people appreciate that, even if you're writing a difficult story. So I'm always very, very transparent. Here are the points I'm going to make. Here's your chance to respond to them. So I thought maybe that would help, and maybe it did. Yeah.
Any techniques? You don't want to. I know you don't want to give up your secrets, but how did you get some of these people to talk? I mean, what was, they signed NDAs. They were told by Simons, and even at Paulson. Like, how did you get people to agree to talk? Can you give us a little bit of insight in terms of your approach?
I mean, first and foremost, I collect compromising photos. I don't necessarily use them all the time. I can threaten, that's just as effective, I found. No. So listen, I think that everyone has a reason why they will talk to a guy like me. I have to find that reason. Sometimes it's ego. Sometimes it's to make sure what I write is accurate. Sometimes it's because I'm writing about their competitors and they don't really want to be written about, but if their competitors going to be written about, maybe they will. There are other kind of reasons. So there is it's a challenge. It's not easy, especially again with Simons' crew. I was up nights worrying that they wouldn't talk. I wouldn't get enough people to talk. So I'm very thankful and grateful that people did talk. I do think that when you're involved in something really big and important, like the Simons guys, Renaissance, they are the greatest firm in history. Part of you wants to talk. Maybe your bosses don't want you to talk, but you want to share that accomplishment to some extent. So I try to focus on that when I reach out.
So appeal to the ego maybe a little bit?
A little bit. Depends who they are.
Okay. So you revealed that The Frackers was your favorite book to write. Which was the most challenging book to write?
I tried to save the world because I had to learn the science, and that doesn't come to me easily by nature. And I had a tight deadline, and it was in the middle of COVID, so I couldn't travel places where I wanted to. I wanted to go to Germany and meet the people from BioNTech. I had to source up. I never heard of this company. I had to find dozens of people part of BioNTech who worked with BioNTech, worked there before, worked with the founders, etc. So that was difficult.
Okay. So I want to get a little bit into the publishing and the writing a little bit more. When you first were writing The Greatest Trade Ever, what was the most surprising thing about the book publishing process?
How, and it still is a surprise, how much it's a reflection of my vision, the book. It's really my vision at the end of the day. You have editors, you have publishers, but much more so than the Wall Street Journal, you can dictate to some extent, to a large extent, sort of how you want the book to look and appear. And I love that. It gives you independence and freedom. So that was very surprising to me,
And let me ask you about, we've talked a lot about this over the years. You've become really adept at book promotion. And particularly for journalists, I imagine it's hard. I make my career working in corporate communications and public relations. You guys are writers, you're journalists. That's obviously a very uncomfortable part of it, but it's essential. How did you find the promotion part of it? Was that surprising? And how have you become so good at it?
It's necessary. I've learned that it's necessary. I've learned that it's hard. I've learned that if you work that hard on a book, you want people to read it. And you got to swallow your pride and share the book, reach out to people about the book, tell them about it. You've got to work at it. You got to force yourself. The key is how effing hard I worked on it. So if I'm going to work that hard on the book, I want people to read it. And so I'll do everything I can to get people to read it.
How much has changed since you published your first book in terms of publishing and dealing with, you've said you've jettisoned your agent, so that's changed. So now you're pitching the book yourself. The last 3 books, I think, were published by Portfolio, right? Penguin Portfolio?
Yeah, all my books,
So talk about how you got onto their radar, but how has publishing just changed, in the last 12 years that you've witnessed?
So Portfolio, I started with Crown, but they got subsumed into, I think they maybe exist again, they didn't for a while, and my original editor left. They got subsumed into Penguin Random House. What happened was Portfolio published my original book, Greatest Trade Ever, in England.
Okay.
And they did really well with it. Oh, that was Viking was it was portfolio with them. Anyway, so I had a relationship with my publisher, Adrian Zuckerman, who's just a great guy, and he believed in my vision, and he believed in the Frackers. He wanted my agent at the time didn't, but Adrian did. So why not work with Adrian? And then subsequently, he's loved my ideas and I love him. So why not keep working together?
Yeah. Okay. So it's been a good relationship.
Yeah.
What do you see the challenges, just broadly with publishing? I mean, I know sometimes the resources are thin and you do have to do your own publicity. Now you have AI being a challenge. How do you see publishing and book publishing going forward?
So I'm really lucky. I'm grateful. I mean, people don't read anymore. I mean, come on. And I make my living writing books, 300-page books.
Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
And the book publishing world has been in hardcover, especially, it has held up pretty darn well.
Yeah.
Don't know how. I'm thankful and grateful, and I feel lucky. So the biggest change is how people have shorter attention spans. We see it in the Wall Street Journal. We see it elsewhere. TikTok, it dominates. And yet people buy books. I'm eternally grateful and thankful.
Yeah. So just talk about that balancing position. You talked about the issue when you were doing the Simons book, but how do you balance the position, your role at the Journal with being a book author?
So it's hard in terms of my time, but I find there are many more hours in the day than we realize. So I write in the morning, I write late at night, I write deep into the evening, and I don't sleep that much. And then I catch up. I keep the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath.
Sure.
And so I can't use electronics or anything for 25 hours, and I sleep a lot. So I catch up a lot.
When you sleep?
Then, So, and in terms of the Journal, I like it to be a win-win. So I'll do reporting for the book, but if I hear a story, like I was out talking to Charlie Munger last week for this new book, and I got a good story, I think, for the Journal, and that's the hope, that's the goal.
Okay.
So my hope is that 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing, if that makes sense, where I'm working on the book and the Journal gets a good story. I'm working on the Journal, and I hear something from my book, and it works out for both of them. But that's the hope. That's the way it's worked.
So it's a little symbiosis, it sounds like sometimes.
Yeah, that's the hope. Yeah, it often works out nicely. Yeah, there's overlap. Yeah.
All right, so you teased a little bit. You talked to Charlie Munger related to your new book. All right, anything else you could?
I don't
break some news here. I'm playing the journalist role.
That's good. That's good. I am tempted. Tempted. I probably shouldn't.
All right, what's? Give us a little.
That's good. That's good. You got to say you've got compromising photos.
Of course I have compromising.
Yeah. Well, in that case,
let's show them.
It's related to great trades. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So I hinted at the first.
Yeah, you did. You did
book.
hint at that.
And
right.
Charlie Munger is just a fascinating character. He's got some really interesting, important trades with a lot of lessons to them, a couple of investments over the years. So it's not a book about Munger, but that's a little hint of things. And if people find that hopefully people find that interesting.
What's the timeline? When's that going to come?
Again, I can't kill myself anymore. So I'm going to spend the next 1.5 to 2 years on it.
Okay, Adrian, you heard him. He's got to take a little more time to write this one. Okay, let's just end because I mentioned at the beginning you're actually you're the author of 6 books. 2 of the books you have 2 very interesting co-authors. So you have 2 books that are focused on sports that you've written with your sons. Tell me about that.
Yeah, they're both called Rising Above and Rising Above Female Athletes. And it's about how these stars overcame challenges in their youth. And it's for young people. And it's funny, I did 2 of them. I did one that's mostly male athletes, but there's a female athlete too. And it's done great. It still sells really well. The other one is the one the publisher wanted. You'll be interested in this, so maybe your audience. They were like, the first one's good. Good for you, Greg. But girls read more than boys. Can you do a book that's only about female athletes? That's what they were really excited about. That one has not sold at all.
Really?
Nothing. I mean, barely. I don't know, like 8,000 copies or something.
Okay.
The other one's over like 150,000 copies.
Really?
Maybe 200. It's crazy. I think partly because girls read more than boys, there are more books for girls. That's my theory.
Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, I didn't do those 2, frankly, I did it to help inspire young people, but I also did it to work with my 2 sons.
Yeah. So how old were they when they did the first book?
They were both in grade school, then high school, and it was just so much fun. I mean, we went to Yankee Stadium and sat in a dugout and talked to R.A. Dickey, the pitcher at the time for Toronto Blue Jays, before a game. And he got so caught up in his story, and he's got a really remarkable story. He was sexually abused by 2 members of his family growing up. He was an alcoholic. He was suicidal. He lost his fastball.
Wow.
He's got a crazy story, and he got really into telling us because he knew we were going to share it with young people.
Yeah.
He got so caught up in telling us that Troy Tulowitzki, who was the shortstop at the time, had to say to us, "Excuse me, guys, I'm trying to get on the field so I can stretch before the game."
Right.
And that was a real thrill.
Yeah.
And we went out to California and met Jim Abbott, the pitcher, who was born with one arm.
Yeah.
And that was inspirational. And there were so many things, racism people overcame, and physical differences, and poverty, and abuse, and how they overcame them. It still, to this day, is really inspirational. And that explains why one of those books still does well. It doesn't explain why the other one doesn't.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And so great that you got your kids involved. How did they like the process? How much, how much writing did they do? Like, tell me about like their involvement.
Yeah, well, they came out. It was more the interviewing that they participated with, and that's good experience in life. Being able to handle yourself and talk to people. They also helped promote it. I went on New York One with my youngest son at the time, which was kind of cool. And we did this sports channel, like ESPN of Israel. We did live together. And we did some speeches and events, and that was a lot of fun. So they helped me with the interviewing, and then they would read the chapters. But at the end of the day, they're not, professional, right? They were young, so they'll tell you they helped write it.
Of course,
but
you got to say, oh yeah, they did all the writing with me.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm not going to pretend. I was up nights with that one too. Yeah,
for that one too. But a little more fun than the other ones, or
oh yeah,
just a lot of fun.
It wasn't easy. It was not easy.
Right.
Good writing is good writing, and we didn't really write down to the audience. But it was so much fun.
So if you weren't a writer for the Wall Street Journal, or would you be a sports writer for the Journal if you weren't doing writing about?
No, I enjoy sports too much to write about it. I've seen sports reporters, and I'm not sure they enjoy the games as much as I do, or at least when my teams aren't doing as poorly as they are this year. Giants, they need to rebound here, 40-0. Anyway, but so I don't think I'd be a sports reporter. No, I'd be an entrepreneur. I like business. I like coming up with ideas and seeing if they work. But this is sort of entrepreneurial in a way, coming up with ideas.
Very entrepreneurial. Okay, anything else you want to plug? I mean, we got 4 books. We'll put them on the website. Anything else?
No, I'm good, thanks.
All right, Greg, that's your time on Read the Bolt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great being here.
Okay.